Welcome to the session on the Tamil story. We have with us two unusual people, literateurs. The first, to my left, immediate left, is Subashree Krishnaswamy, who is an editor, a translator, and a writer. And the far left is María Reimóndez, is a Galician writer, a language perhaps many of us know little about, an interpreter and an activist. We've called this the Tamil story, based on a book that Subashree has translated, which I will invite her first to talk about.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. The Tamil story, it's this book. It's an anthology of 88 stories. Now, Tamil, as you all know, is a classical language with a very, very rich heritage and history. But the modern short story, as we know it, was not part of our tradition. It's something we got from the West. So when it came, and first they read it, the Tamils read it as translations, and soon they started writing it. The amazing thing is, very quickly they subsumed it into their own culture, and they situated it in their own milieu, and wrote about their concerns and the complexities of their life. And I don't think there ever was a dull moment. And they just so quickly took to it. And the nice thing about this is, usually when we talk of the early writers, the three writers who come to mind are actually the great nationalist Subramanya Bharati, Madhavaya, and Vavesu Iyer. But to our delight, I have to say a few words about the editor, Dilip Kumar. Now, Dilip Kumar is, unfortunately, he's not here today because he's traveling in the US. Now, Dilip Kumar is also a very, very unusual person. He's a Gujarati who writes in Tamil. And there's no one who knows more about contemporary Tamil literature than Dilip. He's really soaked it all in. Now, when we were, thinking of, tracing the evolution of the Tamil short story, so what we did was, we took the early stories and right up till 2000, the present, okay? So that's why we have about 88 stories in all. So we traced the evolution of the Tamil short story, and as I said, we were looking at these three great writers, and Dilip found this lovely story, and I'm very, very happy to say that it is by a woman called Ammani Ammal. And, I'll just tell you a little bit about the story, so you'll know, how sophisticated and nuanced, this story is really. Now, it begins like a parable, okay? There are a couple of trees talking, and then squirrels. And then when Dilip gave it to me to read, I settled in for a comfortable read with a smile on my face. I thought, oh, okay, a very cute story. A grandmother's written it, and it's going to be full of homiles. Now, as I read, then I just got such a start. I nearly jumped up because she very cleverly, it begins with a couple of, trees talking, and one tree wants to be made into something useful. So one tree says, why don't you, become a mast? You can travel the world over. But the other one says, no, I don't want to be a mast. I want something permanent. So something tells, somebody tells this tree, no, so why don't you become paper? And then, something will be printed on it, and you live forever as a good book. So that's what this tree wants to be. Now, when it was finally cut, it was not made into a very fine book. Instead, the writer, what she does is very cleverly brings us to the present by inserting advertisements. So it's actually become very, very cheap paper, quality, newsprint, on which very, very cheap advertisements have been printed. Like, sparrow virility potion, okay, sadhu flies, cold-blooded murder in Chingalpet. So that kind of thing. Then one man picks it up, reads it on the train, throws it on the ground. Another man picks it up and buys fish on the way. So that's, that's what it becomes. And then we think, okay, so the story is going to end there. And actually, she takes it to the classroom. It's actually a teacher reading out the story to the students. Okay? And then the teacher says, so what's the moral? Now he's expecting something like, man proposes, God disposes, or something. Now there's a little boy who gets up and says, who's been thinking about this story, and then he gets up and says, the wretched thing is these newspapers should be banned. You know? So completely subverting, and to think this was written in 1913. And then there's a little write-up, in the end, a comment by the writer. And there she says, yes, don't you think we also should listen to children? And, this child says, and so much has been written on such poor print and such, worthless information, and often all error-ridden. So, do you think this child is right? And we can see why the story is ageless, because even today it holds good. I mean, this is the same state, right? People, error-ridden newspapers written badly, and then we're all reading them. So this is a very clever subversion, and to think it was 1913, and where she subverted the whole thing and made this little child, and forced us adults, the teacher and the readers, to listen to a small child. So you can see how nuanced and sophisticated it was. The sad thing was, we couldn't find out who this lady was. We just have her name, Ammani Amman. We searched for 3 years. We hope with the publishing of this book, somebody will come up and tell us. Actually, there are some roads named Ammani Amman Street. We went there, and then we followed up with the corporation, but no one seems to know who this lady is. So that's the tradition that, so from then on, there's never been a dull moment. So we have these wonderful stories, and then later on we have Pudumai Pittan, Mauni, and Pudumai Pittan's story here is so good. And then we have Kalki, and then we have a whole lot of very, very fine writers. And you can see as, the evolution goes on, you really know the Tamil psyche and the society and how it is lived. It's also a cultural history of sorts. And to the present, to the raw Dalit voices. So it's a very, very, it was wonderful working on this project and wonderful working with this writer. And they're very, very, these fine 88 stories. So we just kept 3 things in mind when we chose the story. Now, one is, we wanted a very, very strong sense of the story, because there are going to be conflicts in the nuances of translation. So it has to rise above all that. And I also had to keep in mind that I should never, ever let the writers down. That was what was working on my mind, because they are very, very fine writers and very fine stories. And I can't do a bad job and then, showcase them in Poelai. So that was one thing. We had to have a very strong sense of the story. Then we also cast the net very wide, in the sense, culturally, socially, and professionally. So we try to include everything that makes up the Tamil psyche and ethos. So you have urban, you have rural, you have various communities, you have everything in this. And the third thing was, we also wanted writers who are very, very serious about short fiction, the genre as a form. And we wanted also the depicted experience to be very truthful and authentic. So these are the 3 things we kept in mind when we chose these 88 stories. And I have to say, Dilip at least waded to 10,000 stories to choose these 88. So what we left out also is actually as important. So that's the story of the thing, and really, I think it was a very, very humbling experience for me.
Can I now ask Maria to say, how is it that a Galician writer should be interested at all in Tamil writing? What is the story there?
Good morning, and thank you very much for coming. In order to answer that question, I have to tell a story about the story itself. I have to start by recalling how I first came to Tamil Nadu. Actually, I came to southern India in '94 as a woman who has been working with grassroots women's organizations, and since '98 I have been working with such organizations in Tamil Nadu. I started an organization, a feminist organization in Galicia, and it works on two levels. One level is supporting the women here and their groups and their associations so that they can make decisions for themselves and decide over their lives. But then there's another part, which is more relevant to this discussion, which has to do with our own society in the West, and how poverty, as we understand it, is also created by the stereotypes and the colonial imaginary we still carry with us. So one of the things we started thinking about in the organization was to create links with activists and with artists, with writers, who are also working in their own language, because we have our own language and we share that common experience of marginalization in a way. We live in a country that's not very fond of multilingualism, and that the experience of being writers in Galician also makes us more sensitive to others who write in their own language, in their own mother tongue, when there is a central state that has defined other languages as general for everyone. So we took that as the first step, and I have to say that many of the writers I have translated, feminist writers in Tamil, have also been part of the work that we do here with local organizations, and they have been visiting the slums and interacting with the women. Some of them, such as Kutirevati, they have worked with the women to create street plays. So there was a very organic interaction between all of us. So we were lucky enough to bring some of them to Galicia, such as I said, Kutirevati, with whom I have also directed a documentary, and Salma, for example, and in 2015 we also brought María Reimóndez, and it was always very interesting to see that we had their books published always with Galician writers as well, with Galician women writers, so the poems are read together. And then we also organized some workshops where our writers and whoever was coming from Tamil Nadu could interact. And that was a very interesting experience, because sometimes we think that translation is a one-way road, and of course it departed from our need to have the diverse voices and wonderful voices of these writers heard in our community. But at the same time, in our case, it's at least a two-directional exercise, because these writers are now very influential in our community, and I can tell you some of the impacts that they have had. Like, for example, there are many feminist writers in Galician who now consider these writers as their reference. And when they are asked, okay, you know, the press tends to ask these silly questions like, who are your the writers that influence your writing? And many of them are mentioning Sukirtarani or Pamirati Tangapandiam or any of these other writers, because they are so impressed by the work that they do, and they have also had the chance to meet some of them in person. So this whole process is, for me, I see myself as a very humble element in it, because my command of the Tamil language is very humble as well. So I always work with the translations that the writers themselves provide, not by them, they may be by other people they trust, into English, or I work with somebody else to translate the texts into Galician. I was also very happy to translate Salma's novel into Galician in a regular publishing house, and I have to say that once again it was very well received, and both the critics and the readers were very impressed with her novel. She had the chance to come over there to launch it, and it was a very interesting exchange that helped us also destroy all these stereotypes and colonial ideas about Indian women and then Muslim women, and to read her novel as a literary work that also appeals to us. And maybe just to say a few words, and then you can ask us, and we can have a more interesting discussion rather than a monologue. Just to say a few words about that particular translation. Though I was working with the English language version that exists and going to the Tamil every now and then, sometimes I think that in India there is an obsession of translating everything into English, and that seems to make you important when you write in another language that's not English in India. And sometimes we forget that there are other languages out there that may be more connected to our experiences than what we think. And the fact that English has become this sort of international language makes it very difficult for literary translation sometimes to work. Maybe you have more to say about this. In the case of Salma's novel, she writes about a very specific community of women, of Muslim women, living in rural Tamil Nadu in the Trichy district. And their conversations, for example, read in English, were for me very difficult to read because I could not imagine these women speaking this language. And it was kind of artificial in a way. But in Galician, we do have the same kind of setup of rural women who get together and they have all these tongue-in-cheek conversations about sex or about, the relationship to men, etc. So I think that the Galician readers could really connect with the story despite the huge distances that exist between our lives and the lives of the women being told. And as I said, the fact that we both speak and write in a language that's not the hegemonic language of our countries also brings a lot of commonalities. And we always have to negotiate, all these writers negotiate their identity in two ways. First, with the patriarchal nationalist Tamil establishment, we have the same kind of conflict over there with the Galician nationalist patriarchal establishment. And then with the hegemonic language and culture, in our case, Spanish, and here, I would say English nowadays, more than Hindi, but anyway, that is the struggle also that Tamil faces. So, that's, I think, a different way of approaching translation as a way to communicate amongst feminists and know each other better and undo this colonial discourse that we are very fond of still in the West. And I just brought one of the books. Unfortunately, I didn't bring all of them because there are several, and there are also musicians who have worked with the poems of Sukittarani and Kutirevati and Tamilachi. But I brought this particular one. It was published by our organization. It's a book I'm very fond of because it came out of two workshops. One workshop which was conducted by Sukittarani in the slums of Trichy with the women there, with the self-help group women there. Also to see writing as a form of empowerment, of having your own voice. So these were women who had not been asked to write anything before, but they had a lot to say and a lot to write about. And we did the same thing in Galicia. We had a workshop. Me as a writer conducted a workshop with Galician women who were not published writers before. And we published this book, and the title is My Light Will Shine on All of Us. And it's one of the poems written by one of these women in the slum, Umarani. So it's just for you to see at least something of what we are doing.
What do you do with culture-specific words? Do you retain them, or do you try and translate them? Do you give a gloss, a footnote or something?
There are two decisions that we took. One is where the descriptions are concerned, we kept it a little formal. But I have to say that we may have been colonized by the British, but we have tamed English, okay? It does a very, very desi dance on our tongues, and it also depends on which region. For instance, in Tamil Nadu, it would be the way, it's peppered with a lot of Tamil. We bring the baggage of our Indian languages into English. And I was quite happy with that, use that for especially dialogues. Because dialogues have to sound natural, and it has to sound the way people speak. And even us, most of us who also are very professional, we may have studied in English, we use English professionally. But when we are in a professional setup, it's a little different. But when we are among friends or family, we speak a little differently. Okay, we use all the wrong tags, and then for instance, if a group of friends, have decided to meet for lunch, then when one of them appears, the other says, "Oh, you've come early, is it?" Now that "is it" is typical Indian. Nobody in India would say, "Oh, you've come early, have you?" That's really correct. So I kept my ear to the ground, and I use things. "We're going, no." Then the friend would say, "Then what? We'll starve or what?" Things like this, "then what?" "Is it? We're going, is it?" Compassion at all, is it? One of the, the conversations go, and then one says, "What, sir? You're talking about this and that." You know, that's the way we speak, and I wanted to retain that for the dialogues. And we have also used, even words like chi, chi. What are you saying? You know, all that's come into English. So we can actually freely use that. And also kinship terms, as he was saying, we have to use kinship terms because in India, the mother's brother is different from the father's brother. And you have to make all these, and they're very, very important to the story and to the dialogue. And also, now a lot of urban people have started calling their parents mummy, daddy, okay? Now, if it's a small child, down south, and asking for gruel, I can't make her say, "Daddy, I want some gruel." I mean, it'll sound like she's asking for a pizza or something, okay? Because people have started using this mummy and daddy. So you have to say appa, amma. And then we have some clever interpolations that we use whenever possible. Like for instance, I would say, "Pati, my grandmother," okay, comma, was sitting on the veranda. Now thereafter, the reader will know that Pati means grandmother. If we can weave in these interpolations very cleverly without, disturbing the flow, we have tried it sometimes. But there is a glossary. I don't like footnotes too much because, especially with works of fiction, it makes it very academic. And in this book, I think we don't have footnotes, but we have got a glossary at the back. I know some people don't like glossary, but there are some interested readers who do like to know what the term means, so that there are glossaries. And we have not actually used dhoti because dhoti is very Hindi. We've used veshti. Okay, that's typically Tamil. So we've kept all that in mind and not said she's chewing pan, she's chewing leaves, okay, and not a chai shop, it's a tea shop. Because in Tamil Nadu, nobody says chai shop, we all say tea kadai, okay. So these are decisions that we take so that it also sounds natural and it's quite a pleasure to read. So even if you find the ride a little bumpy, I think it will be a joyful ride.
Yeah, so I think that we share some of the strategies, Subashree and myself. I have to say that I was also very wary about this exotization of the text because, of course, Galician is not English, which is one of the languages spoken in India, and you can have resources such as the ones you were mentioning. So I was very wary about some forms of exotization, like keeping some words. And one of the things that we always do is we have an introduction for all the books. And in particular, I'm going to be speaking about Salma's translation, which is more of a formal, published book, a novel, where we can see more of an array of strategies being used. So in that translation, I introduced an introduction first to not just to contextualize the work, but also to speak about my translation strategies and the choices I had made and why. And for example, we also had this problem that Salma's novel is written by a Muslim Tamil-speaking woman. So there are many things that even Hindu Tamils don't understand in that book. So there are lots of terms related to prayers or to practices that are very specific of that Muslim community she's describing. So what I did was, on the one hand, I kept some, for example, the family terms, because I think that they were very relevant to the story as well. They gave you a perspective of who's talking. Like if somebody says Periama, you know that is this child talking. You know, when the same character is referred to in different ways depending on who's talking about this person, because they have a different family relationship. And I was also very clear that the Western, and in this case Galician reader, is the one who has to make the effort. So my strategies are different when I'm a trained and professional translator. That's my job. And of course, when I translate somebody from the UK or from Germany, which is some of my languages, I do not use the same strategies as when I translate a writer from Tamil Nadu, because I think that while I don't care about doing away with London and translating it as the capital if it's irrelevant, I think that for us as a culture, we need to reconsider the way we look at our others. And in that sense, I really wanted to make the Galician reader make the effort of going into the story. And many people said that it was difficult for them to read the book because of these terms, and also, of course, the names and everything is foreign. But at the same time, it was a far more rewarding experience. And I also added a glossary for the reason, but I explained it in this way. I'm also not very happy with glossaries and things like that, because I think, as I said, that people have to learn to make the effort. But the way I explained it was, I was talking to many of my Tamil friends who happened to be Hindus, who had read the novel, Salma's novel, and they said that they had to go to their neighbors and ask, the Muslim neighbors, and ask, what is this? Because I don't understand it. So the way I explained it in the introduction was, I am playing the role of the neighbor here. So if you want, you can come and ask the glossary, the things that you do not understand. But if you don't want it, just read through it. Yeah. So this is like what the Tamil Hindu readers were doing in their own reading of the novel. So I tried to replicate a bit that experience through the glossary.
Okay, I'm just reading, a passage from a story called Milk Account, and it's written by S.V.V. And it's the story written in the 1940s. I don't know how many of you remember that in those days, a milkman would come home and actually milk the cow or the buffalo, and then give the milk, and you pay at the end of the month. You keep note of how many you buy, and in those days there were no kilos, or it was called araku. That's how they bought it. It was a measure. The araku was a measure, and you bought it in that. Okay, and in English it used to be written as oloks. Okay, so I don't know how many OLMOCK. That's how it used to be written. So this is a conversation between the husband and wife, and it's they're just talking about it at home. And he says, "What is the milk account for this month?" I asked, with the intention of tallying the accounts between the two of us before the milkman came home. "What big account?" It's like this: till the 13th, 3/4 oloks cow's milk and 3/4 olok buffalo milk in the morning. In the evening, 1.5 oloks cow's milk, 2.5 oloks buffalo milk, and on one of those days, he said the animal kicked him and gave only a quarter measure. About cow's milk, remember one day we went for a film. That day he came and went. That day, of course, we didn't buy milk. Besides, the previous month, he owed us 7 oloks. What account? This is the account. Till the 13th, these are the calculations. So the husband says in return, every month I tell you, jot down in a book, every day, whatever you buy. How easy it will be then to quickly do the accounts. What is there to write? Daily we're buying only the same quantity, no. What same quantity? One day you're saying 2 oloks less, another day you're saying 3 oloks more. Even if the great Ramanujan appears, late Ramanujan appears, he won't be able to do your account. Okay, tell me. So that's how the conversation goes. And it's a delightful story, because through the conversation, their entire life unfolds. You know who visited them, how their life is, and what they were doing. So that's how it goes.
Okay, so let me read the Galician version of this poem. I have the Tamil poem here, but I'm not willing to read it. If you want to read the title, Morning Star, would be the English translation of it. Yeah. Estrela da mañá. Nacín como a estrela da mañá. Viaxei como as nubes, enchínme de calor, fíxenme treboada quente de lume sobre eles. Non decaerei, a miña luzada iluminaranos a todas. This is again also by Umarani. It's called Us Women. Rematemos coa escravitude e venzámolo ao home hexemónico. Demostremos a verdade para confirmar a nosa propia vida. Descartémolo ao home que non está ao noso lado. Iniciemos os actos, os desafíos, os pensamentos que garantan os dereitos das mulleres. Actuemos con coraxe e escorrentemos as preocupacións. Manteñamos a nosa estima e non malgastemos as nosas vaguas. Fagamos todo motivadas, forza física non nos falta. Espilamos os medos como a tenreira destemida. Atopémolo o noso camiño con creatividade e non nos converteremos en escravas. Manteñamos os azos, defendamos as nosas opinións, confirmemos as vías para mellorar a nosa situación. Gabemos as mulleres empoderadas e que loitan polos seus dereitos. Non agardemos o apoio de ninguén, mais que o noso apoio non nos falta ningunha. Non nos agochemos na sociedade, demostremos que temos coraxe. eduquemos as mulleres para mellorar as nosas vidas.
This is another conversation. Now, this is actually called The Key, and it's by Rajendra Choran. And this story, I'll just reach out and you'll know what it means. He heard it with much happiness and joy. What an opportunity after so many years. Opening a lock without a key was an art in itself. An interesting task too. It was in his hostel days that he had opened his friends' locks like this. After that, where did one find a lock without a key? So he asked the wife, it's between the husband and wife, how did you lose it? He asked with a laugh. His wife replied, didn't lose it, forgot, put it in and locked it away. And he, who usually washed his legs and face whenever he returned home, went straight to the box today. Bring that lamp. The wife brought the lamp. So then, I'll just read bits and pieces. He keeps searching for something to pick the lock, but he can't find. So he says, bring a small nail. Small one? The wife dragged on hesitantly. Yes, something which will fit into this hole. He began to search. The wife came back with a tiny piece of tin. Take a look at this. He looked at it and then looked up at her. Will this fit? Will this fit? Don't you have any sense of proportion? She moved away dejectedly. And then she comes back with something else. See, this will fit. She came with an old umbrella ring. He took it and flung it away on the floor. Shouldn't you have some sense? Will this thing ever fit into that? If it's a Godrej lock, you can open it with a calendar rod. This stupid thing is a tiger lock. A small nail is what we need. And then he opened the wooden box and rummaged through it. Why have you kept everything in such a mess? How many times I have to tell you? Can't you keep everything in order? Gee, is it a box? All rubbish. It's such a mess. And then he tells her, go bring the lantern. Hold the lantern, bring it here. And then he tells her, hold it lower, this way. Bring it here. And after that, he tries to open and he just cannot open. And he keeps shouting at his wife, gee, is this any way to hold a lantern? Instead of holding it on one side, shaking it this way and that. Once again he attempted, he stopped, he turned and glared at her. Don't you know which way I'm turning and which way you should hold? Are you a small child? And losing patience, he started poking around, this way and that. There was a rattling sound, but the lock refused to open. And then he said, Cheh, after running here and there, when you enter home, is there any peace? Some problem or the other, as soon as one steps in. You must have some responsibility, no? Nicely gorging every few hours and idling away time with a storybook. Otherwise, if someone comes by, gossiping. And towards the end, and then he says, leave the lantern and go. And she really leaves it and goes. And he says, oh, you've gone off, is it? As soon as I told you off. Waiting to run away. Bring that coconut oil bottle here. Where's the oil? This morning only you completely upturned it and oiled your head. Only if we buy in the morning. Couldn't you have told me this earlier? No habit of telling as soon as something gets over. Wonderful way of running a home. Okay, you lock the key inside. What precious thing is inside that you must lock it away every now and then? Will someone come and rob it? Go and bring some gingerly oil at least. No, just leave it. I'll try to open it myself in the morning. You just get up. He took off his sweaty vest to hang on the clothesline. He grumbled. Yes, never short of this kind of empty, boastful talk. So this is the kind of thing, when you start some job with enthusiasm, and then it's like a bad carpenter blaming his tool. And then he starts blaming her, he starts blaming everything, and then again, to see their life and what a life in a rural setup with a, lower middle class family. This is, this is the way I've treated conversations.
This is to Subashree. The reading of the passages, I see, this is okay. I see it as very simple day-to-day conversation. What one must do to make it more appealing, but what changes one has to bring in Tamil literature, and why Tamil literary personnel are not getting any international awards. What one has to do it. Not even Tamilians, especially in India as a whole, like Indian literature is not so recognized abroad, what one must do it and ponder upon this.
I don't know. Actually, what I read was only because he asked me how I treated dialogues. There are some very, very serious stories in this. You just have to read Pudhumaipithan's story, which is just amazing. I mean, he wrote this in the 1940s, and it's a thoroughly modern take. And it takes a look at, it's a juxtaposition of life and death. And there is a beggar who died. It was when Madras was transitioning into an urban jungle. And it's set in the 1930s. And there is a beggar who's dying. And a small child witnesses that. And it's a very, very clever and also a cruel juxtaposition of life and death. Because the child doesn't know what death is. The father just goes across the road to buy mangoes. And the child is just standing there. And this beggar is dying, and he has his friend helping him. And he's giving him water. And she says, and that beggar says, just move away. He's dying. So she asks him, what is dying? And then she watches him, and then he gives him some sips of water. And she thinks of her mother giving her milk. And she says, drink slowly, she tells the beggar. And when the beggar's head slumps, she thinks it's a joke. She says, do it again. So that they are very, very powerful stories. And to make them known, I think, through various translations into our Indian languages also, and into English. And we hope that there are more and more readers that we get, okay? So, and we have very powerful Dalit voices. I just gave two examples because he wanted to know how I treated dialogues. Yeah.
It's nice to meet both of you, and my question is for both of you. It's general consensus that when something is translated, there is some sort of chipping away of the original context. I mean, we literally have lost in translation as a phrase. How much do you think was possibly lost when you both had to work on this?
Okay, and now I have to bring the translation scholar that I am to speak against this idea of losing in translation. Translation is always a game. So this is actually a Western concept. And if you look at your Indian tradition of translation, I don't think that this idea of anything getting lost in translation is there. So that's the first thing I have to say. For me, as a feminist and post-colonial translation scholar, I think that this is a Western thing that has to do with the translations of the Bible and blah, blah. So I never see translation as a loss. I see it as a very interesting opening up in which, of course, we translators have a very important role to play. That role has been played for the sake of empires and patriarchy for a long time. And there are many patriarchal and colonial translations, and translators were very active in the colonization enterprise, and they still are in many ways. So I think that maybe we need to shift this discussion to a discussion about how things get translated, and also going back to the gentleman's question, how culture is circulated, and what are the power issues at stake there. Because we know that same as we writers in Galician don't get awards abroad, Tamil writers also don't get them. And that is due to a politics of what is worthwhile that are based on ideas about the importance of certain languages. Now in the world context we can speak about English as the main one, but in our context it would be Spanish. So unless we ourselves establish ways of talking to one another, because after all the majority of the world's population doesn't speak English, at least not as their first language. So unless we start giving value to what we do and talking to each other, then those structures of power are not to be broken down. So I think that, as Subashree was saying, first the translations of these works inside India, so that we know what we are doing, all of us, and then also thinking about these experiences I was telling about, talking to communities that may share some of the intrinsic inequalities in which we live, and trying to establish dialogues and push together. Because a literature on its own, Galician literature or Tamil literature, cannot do anything when they speak about universal literature, they speak about dead white men. So if we continue thinking that world literature is just Shakespeare and Goethe, then we cannot expect our writers to be known anywhere. So we have to do that through translation, but critical translation. Yeah. So we also have to know how to address and deal with the text, and especially with our own position in that process.
Yeah, the other thing, one thing is, if you translate from one Indian language to another, probably we share so many things. And it is a given that English has a different vocabulary and syntax. So something is not going to be there. But why do we translate? I mean, why do I translate? I translate because I enjoyed it so much in the original that I want others who can't access the original to enjoy it. Okay? So there is something going to be lost. But there is a universal appeal to all this. And it is our duty as translators. Now, if it is humor, we have to capture that. If it is irony, we have to capture that. And to the best of our ability, what do you do when you translate actually? You actually dismantle it in one language and reassemble it in the other. And we have to do this to the best of our ability. And we hope that the readers will enjoy.
Thank you so much to both our panelists. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you, audience, for an interesting conversation.